Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with HYCU. The focus is the hidden costs of backup scripts, and specifically in Atlassian Cloud. We're going to give everybody a few minutes to join. So give yourselves a couple of seconds to get settled, maybe some coffee, tea. Just as a disclaimer as well, this presentation is being recorded. You're going to receive an email. You're going to receive the recording as well so that you can watch again or share with your peers. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function that you see in the little control panel, not the chat function itself. So make sure you use the Q&A function. I promise that Dan and I will address every single question that you have. Maybe we don't do it in that exact same moment, but we will 100% answer those questions. If you do come up with additional questions or tips, just let us know and we'll make sure to reach out to you as well with much more information. So for those that are joining, let's get started today. My name is Andy Fernandez. I am the Director of Product Management. We're going to, at HYCU, we're going to be able to dive into a very, very specific topic that I'm very passionate about. First, we're talking about ITSM. We're going to be talking about specifically today around Atlassian backup on data protection, around service management, on ITSM, on the ESM side as well. But everything that you pick up today also just applies to traditional Jira as well. But a big focus is actually going through this misty area of shared responsibility, both from a security perspective, from a compliance, from a backup perspective. And then we're also going to evaluate the concept of build versus buy. This is a decision that every single cloud user, cloud organization is facing at this moment. And we're going to take a look at the pros and cons of each one, hear some war stories. And then from there, we're going to talk about a very specific product announcement that I'm very excited about. Everyone on this webinar is actually getting a sneak peek and you'll see it. But I'm very, very excited about that. With that, I want to introduce our star of the day, our guest today. Dan, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you very much.
Oh, perfect. Dan, before we get into the weeds, I know you very well. Dan was one of the first folks I really got to connect with on a technical level in the Atlassian community as HYCU, joined Atlassian Ventures and launched our platform within Atlassian as well. But Dan, for those that don't know you, could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, happily. Hi everyone. My name is Dan Toombs. I have been involved in the Atlassian ecosystem for a little over 9 years now. I started at a solution partner. It was ClearVision for those that may remember the name. It's now part of EffiCode UK. But yeah, that's where I started all those years ago. I got trained as a consultant, and then about 5-ish years ago, I moved on and actually started working for end customers, which has given me a really good insight to see from both sides of the picture and the challenge and actually kind of seeing things through to fruition. I currently work for a satellite communications company, so we get to launch and maintain satellites in space, which is pretty really cool. But yeah, I am the solution architect for Atlassian, so anything Atlassian based is my domain.
Thank you so much, Dan. And I'm sure for everyone's reference as well, when Dan mentions that he's a solutions architect, it's not managing 15 users of Jira. We're talking very, very large deployments with tons of configuration. And so there's a lot of valuable insight here. And that's why we really wanted to talk to Dan, both understanding how he used to help customers, but also how he, as a customer of Atlassian as well, and an expert in the field, is leveraging it as well. But let's actually get into the weeds. For those who are just joining us and might not know who HYCU is, you can find us on the marketplace. We're an Atlassian Ventures company, but we are a platform to protect and unify all of your applications. We have a very specific focus on the Atlassian Cloud stack as well. We have over 4,200 organizations that are trusting us with their most critical data, over 400 partners worldwide. My favorite stat, the most important thing I believe about HYCU is our NPS of over 91. Why? Because we do not lose customers. What we really focus on is making sure that you can make the most out of HYCU, but also the underlying things that you're using HYCU to protect with. One of my favorite things too is a lot of the times organizations find out that they have to go and find a backup for Atlassian, but they're already running backups for everything else, and it becomes a little bit of a Rube Goldberg machine. With HYCU, it's fully unified from on-prem, cloud, and SaaS as well, and we have strategic partnerships across the board. We're also recognized by Gartner, and we have very, very strong backing from an investment perspective. Now, let's get into the matter at hand, though. Dan, I like to share this image because a lot of folks go, well, Andy, what are you talking about? What is this? But one of the things that I wanted to bring up, Dan, is we're having, and so are you, conversations all the time with folks who are migrating to the data to from data center to cloud, or folks who are already on the cloud. And the moment we talk anything around account level or tenant level security, compliance, recovering their own data, we always get this assumption that Atlassian has to do everything, right? Because the pitch was, hey, you no longer have to patch or maintain. You can just subscribe to the cloud and start using it. Why do you think this is such a misconception from a responsibility perspective?
Um, I think part of it drills down to kind of out of sight, out of mind, because of the model in which kind of SaaS platforms were born, which is don't worry, we'll take care of things. That's kind of slowly dripped through in the idea of that actually teams don't need to do anything. Now, of course, Atlassian do offer 30 days of backup and information, unless you're part of like some of the compliance things like HIPAA, where they have designated rulings. But because people just assume that's going to be okay when things get deleted, the assumption is it's part of that 30-day and you're not going to recognize. I can tell you from experience that is just not how it works. And we have been stuck in many sticky situations because of that. But I do think a lot of it boils down to this whole kind of out of sight, out of mind. There is obviously the other aspect, which is um, those the higher levels don't tend to, where they're not necessarily doing the work, they just presume that a backup means that I can restore any part of that backup. And especially within the Atlassian ecosystem, the full, like, entire versus partial restorations, that kind of concept isn't here yet. We only have full restorations, which obviously causes other issues. So it's very challenging for cloud users at the moment.
You know what, Dan? Actually, that's an angle I haven't thought about when it comes to out of sight, out of mind. And it makes sense though, right? When you are consistently, at least from an IT perspective, if you own hosting and managing a data center or a server, you are constantly worried about patching and maintenance and
Yeah.
making sure that you reach the right updates. And it's top of mind. Exploits come out all the time, especially on the Windows side. And when you subscribe to this magic place, this thing in the air called the cloud, you assume that everything's taken care of. And it is at a certain level, right?
Yeah.
But that's a very good point.
That 30-day aspect again, the assumption is if I've deleted something, I would notice within 30 days if it's relevant. But the trouble is that especially when you go into certain industries where they've got higher regulatory requirements, is you would have to keep that information for years. But you may not, so you may only look at it once a year. And if it's been deleted, and you're past that 30-day window, unless you have done a manual backup yourselves, unless you've gone through the process of doing those XMLs, or you've got, you've been lucky, you've scripted or automated like the downloads of those backups, it just doesn't exist. And that's where teams are getting caught.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And one of the interesting things that we find too is that 30-day backup. What people don't realize either is that that's a system level
Yeah,
backup.
it's
That is a
per site.
that is a backup for the purposes of disaster recovery at an outage level, not if Bob's Garage deletes an asset.
Yeah.
That's not the same level of backup nor the expectations. And Dan,
No.
you can tell me if this is a dumb analogy, but the area that I focus on as an example is telling people, look, Atlassian Cloud is just like every other cloud platform, where they have to do their best in certain areas, whether it's AWS, Azure, Microsoft 365. These are cloud platforms that deliver amazing services. Atlassian is one of them, but they are a parking garage. And what I mean by that for the audience as well is, what do you expect when you go to a parking garage, especially in London? If for some reason you decide to drive in London, then what do you expect? That you drive into the garage, that you can pay, that the payment works,
Yep.
that you can drive in, that the lights are on, and then when you come back, there's still a car there. That's it. Those are
Yep.
the expectations, right? But if
Well,
Dan leaves his window down and a gaming laptop is stolen,
which it has
or
been.
which sorry, I didn't mean to bring up old memories
No,
for
I
you there.
know. That was a very teary day when I realized I got back to the car and my window was smashed.
That is brutal. I'm sorry, Dan. But that is exactly a scenario that happens, or somebody scratches your car.
Yeah.
And is the garage, Dan, liable to pay you for that?
Not with these signs.
No, not with these signs. So the focus here is the same relationship from a cloud, from a system level to the tenant level. They will keep the lights on. They make sure that payment processing is working. They are responsible for system level security, system level high availability, system level disaster recovery. What happens inside the tenant, if for some reason you do not enable MFA, if your password as an admin is password, there's nothing that Atlassian can do about that. So
No,
it's
I mean,
very, very important.
they are very clear when you sign up. And if I mean, I haven't, but I've spoken to enough people that have read the terms and conditions about the fact that they are responsible for making sure the overall storage is fine. But what you put in it is your choice, and you have to be responsible for that data.
Exactly, and that is the exact same dynamic that every single cloud platform is going to use, because it is not possible for them to mine the details of a specific tenant. They simply do not have the capacity for it. And to your point, Dan, when they tell folks from a very transparent perspective, here's an example, right? This is the shared responsibility model that they provide. We can send everybody a link on who's on call today. But what do they say? Well, we will make sure that you can access your data. We will make sure that notify you there's a breach. We will keep system level backups, which includes your information. But your role as a customer is to be able to create backups of your data. That is extremely clear. That is something that everyone on this call, whether it's HYCU, whether it's anything else, what matters the most is that you make the decision and you have the awareness to protect your data. That is the most important thing, because it is a very clear responsibility. And what I found, Dan, sometimes is, especially when you and I talked about this rush to migrate from server to cloud, backups, security, everything there, it was kind of an afterthought in the context that people were trying to migrate as quickly as possible. The most important moment to think about these things is before you migrate or when you're migrating, because you don't want to have to then think about your security and data protection posture after you've done the migration.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it's already too late. So, when you're going through the security, effectively a security questionnaire to find the viability of something, this is when most large mature companies will start calling that kind of information out.
Exactly. And then from the stolen laptop in the car to deleted assets and deleted data, I think I'm sorry I keep bringing up bad memories, but one of the examples that I wanted to provide before kind of engaging with you in your experiences was from a customer of ours, the city of Tartu. This is a public sector organization. Public sector organizations have very specific compliance requirements. They are also now going to be part of NIS 2 requirements, and there's so much content that HYCU's focused on NIS 2 that we'll talk about that some other day. But they did something that I've heard many, many people do, and it happens all the time. And it's accidentally changing object types. And when they did that, it disappeared 2,000 assets in a second. Now, at this point in time, they assumed that Atlassian, it was their responsibility to recover. But when they engaged with Atlassian support, the message was, I'm sorry, but we cannot help you with this. This is your responsibility. So they had to go back and take weeks to be able to recover this data. But for every single customer that we have, everyone has a story. We all do. I've deleted things. I probably delete things once a week. Dan, from your perspective, in your personal experience, in colleagues, with other customers, when you see deletion events, what are you seeing that's actually happening the most?
So I think there's two buckets of when you're dealing with deletion. There is the more rare, and I would hope it's definitely more rare, where you're doing kind of large system-wide cleanups, and that's where you're doing your mass deletions, which obviously that tends to relate much better towards when you start dealing with like entire restorations, because that's easier to do. Um, so that's definitely one set of events. It's usually done by administrators who have fully invested and investigated those data, and they know what they're doing. The other is when you'll have your developers or whatever, they may have created an issue in the wrong area. You might have a JSM agent looking at some assets, or it could be like my laptop, for example, realize that it's assigned or they've created a duplicate. They go ahead and delete the record. And because it's made in that split-second decision, they've not actually taken the time to process, am I on the right record? Have I deleted the right thing? And once it's gone, it's gone. It's very like that's why we've made that decision to not give the ability for deletion to everyone, because it's too final. So those are definitely the two scenarios. And every time someone says, and the people we do give it to is project admins, and even the project admins still make mistakes. They come to us and they're saying, we've deleted this thing, can you get it back? And the answer is no, not unless you have solutions like HYCU, or you've been lucky enough that you've recently done a sandbox restoration or anything like that, where that data will then exist. So it's a very fine line, and that's why we really discourage people from deleting.
100%. And I think it's Murphy's Law. If there's a delete button, a deletion will happen at some point in time. It's simply how many times are we clicking through things throughout the day and we're mindlessly thinking about something else. It just happens, and it's going to happen even to the most technical people. We're all human. This is, by the way, Dan, the same reason why you still see successful ransomware attacks. We have amazing cybersecurity solutions. We have amazing firewall networking scene platforms. We do, but why do we continue falling prey to these attacks? Because
Human
people
error.
make mistakes. Human error. It applies to deletions. It applies to misconfigurations. I mean,
Absolutely.
it applies to somebody getting trigger happy with automations too, and then they set the wrong automations, and they can auto delete and kind of
Well,
declare their environment null.
I've fully seen automations bring down networks. So, I mean, that
Exactly.
is just there's no stopping what like you said, um, very rarely are humans intentionally causing something, but it's not, actually on the unintentional ones that you're not ready for.
Exactly. That's a very, very good point. And one of the things that I like to talk about here too is a lot of the times organizations, when you look at the life cycle of an application development or on the ITSM side, there's always been, and rightfully so, especially from a data center perspective, a hardcore focus on tier one production applications, right? The things that you're using Jira to build, right? The things that customers are actively using. But as Atlassian has become so feature rich, as they become so entrenched in our customer, in our employee, in our contractor experiences, it's as critical as production applications sometimes. And what organizations, especially at the executive level, when they think Jira, they're probably thinking still bug tracking. They're not thinking about what it does today from a service desk perspective. They're not thinking about all of the feedback, the product feedback, everything that's being collected as well. So when we think about areas that you have to think about in your organization and what you want to be able to protect, as Dan mentioned, you have to be able to back it up, but there are limitations to what you can do today. So when I think through some of the most critical things in the organization that are threats, because the data could be deleted, it could be misconfigured, one of the most critical ones are assets, especially on the IT side. Assets are critical, yet it's one of the things that you can modify the most. And organizations, and Dan, I know you have experience with this, are relying heavily on asset management. And this is still something that must be protected at all costs. And of course, you have your issues, your requests. We see a little bit less deletions here. We see it more on the asset side. But even things like your Confluence knowledge, the years of documentation, of feedback, of work that live in Confluence, if somebody were to delete that, it is very damaging. That's probably one of the most painful things that you can do, especially because sometimes you can't recreate knowledge of an employee that's no longer there.
No, no, and that one of our biggest one of our biggest challenges that we had in a previous company was actually before someone left, is trying to get all of that knowledge out onto a decent article that we can then use and utilize for the future, and keep going with. I mean, knowledge is one of the biggest areas for potential risk, really.
And one of the areas where organizations cannot afford to not have saved copies of that knowledge, especially from a Confluence perspective, because once again, you can delete a page, you can delete a blog. These are things that, if you can delete, may happen in your organization. And the more users you have, the more likely it could be at the administrative level as well. And of course, automation rules. automations have become incredible, and we'll talk about that later on in the presentation today, Dan. But these are something that must be protected as well, and of course, everything else in your service catalog, everything else that you're using the lifecycle application side as well. But let's now get a little bit into the decision that all of us have had to make at some point using Atlassian. And it doesn't matter if you are an organization that's managing 15 users or you're managing 10,000 users. There are several things here to take into account. And let's go through a couple of the options and we'll deliver the pros and cons and help you understand, especially if you need help building a business case to get help here. This is something that we always support our customers with as well. But Dan, let's talk about the first kind of the most primitive, but the option that everyone thinks they can just survive on, especially when they first get to
Yeah.
Atlassian Cloud, and that's the manual export. Um, Tell me about your perspective. Tell me about your experiences with manual exports and what that looked like for you.
Okay. Manual exports are pretty much, well, I mean, first of all, they are exactly what they say. They're entirely manual. There's no automated process. You have to choose whether attachments are included. You have to click the button. You then have to download once the backup's taken, the XML is taken. You then have to choose where you're going to store that from a longevity perspective. And if there's any restoration that is required for DR or anything like that, you're the one that has to go back in and re-upload and do all that kind of work. They are great for one purpose, and that is ad hoc. That is what they are designed for, really. They are not like a long-term solution. And if that's unfortunately where a lot of companies are, then hopefully we can find something better. But my experience, especially with some of the Atlassian ones, is that they are troublesome. I could be choose my words slightly better, but they're definitely troublesome. And when I have gone ahead and we've done some of these like large cleanups, and we've tried to remake sites healthy because we're a multi-site tenant. And we've gone through this process and we've taken the exports. They've often corrupted, which is where we've then said, okay, well, we'll take a backup just in case. We'll go ahead and delete whatever we need, and if we've then got the backup. We have actually run into this issue. This is exactly how I found HYCU in the first place when we ran into this issue. But I deleted. Team said, actually, we needed that data. I said, not a problem. We've got a backup. I'll restore the backup and take it. Turns out the backup corrupted. And then that was it. Then we go on this 3.5 month Atlassian support ticket in order to try and retrieve any data from the corruption. Then they had to go through their backups. They had to do like a rollback, take out data, put it back to where it was, and it was a massive nightmare. It is not the route I would advise anyone to do as a long-term solution.
No, absolutely. And I tell folks usually manual is the most expensive of the free options that you have because of the
Yeah.
highly corruptible nature of it too. And there's a couple things too
We've
that
spoken entirely on the fact that human error. If you are ill and you are responsible for taking the backup, it doesn't happen because you're ill. That's immediately an issue.
some of the probably the most eye-opening conversations I had, Dan, was met a financial institution that had just moved to cloud. And we were asking questions. It wasn't even a product conversation about Haiku. It was a general conversation at Teams. And I asked them how they were managing backups. And the person blatantly stated, well, Thursday mornings, I do my manual exports. This is a serious financial institution. And what's scary about that is obviously there is a very highly paid person who's spending a lot of time manually exporting data to a hard drive. The export of the instance to the hard drive is not encrypted, so there's already a security flaw in there as well. And all of a sudden, like you mentioned, that person goes on leave, on vacation, gets fired. The organization has a point of failure and cannot even recover, assuming the hard drive is kept in good condition and the backup wasn't corrupted. It's
There's a lot of if, buts, and maybes that come into play when you're dealing with manual exports.
exactly, and as we talked about how critical Atlassian really has become, especially when it comes to DevOps and especially across ITSM. This is no longer something that's negligible in the organization. So one of the things that we can recommend, no matter what you choose and how you approach backups, I always recommend to avoid any type of manual exports as much as you can. This is the most error prone and will be the most expensive option for your organization when it comes to the consequences of downtime, data loss, and also rebuilding. That's the scariest part of how long is it going to actually take you to rebuild, especially after a much more hardcore deletion scenario. But then comes the second, and I say quote unquote free because nothing is free. It's actually leveraging APIs to script your own backups. Now, this is already much better than a manual approach. It really is. But once again, there are different consequences to this. One of the main consequences is it requires to build, to schedule, and to maintain these scripts. This sounds easy, but not to folks who've actually had to do this regularly. This is a very challenging thing that takes a lot of hours. Most admins are rewarded and looking to seek career advancement by building cool things and optimizing, not spending hours and hours trying to keep the lights on.
No, technical debt is a big issue, a big challenge, and it's a big challenge for any actual technical people, because no one wants to be doing it for a start. And obviously, like you said, there's a big process in which you have to analyze the cost of maintenance versus the actual gain and the price that you're going to pay get for it. But it's a massive risk for businesses in general. The more technical debt they have, the higher risk that things can go wrong, knowledge will get lost, coding languages go out of date. There's so many different levels of technical debt that no one wants to be doing these things.
Exactly. And if you're aware that you have to perform backups and script them for Jira, you have to do it for JSM. You have to do it for your Git repository. You have to do it for other ones. I always use that Rube Goldberg machine because it's a perfect example of how quickly complex scripting can become just to perform bulk exports of your data as well. That's one challenge, the amount of time and resources. But once again, Dan, you and I have already talked about this, which is you still cannot perform granular recoveries. You are
No.
still performing a full bulk recovery. What does that actually mean? We're going to get into that in a second, but it still doesn't give you any enhanced recovery capabilities. You are still essentially finding a needle in a haystack every single time somebody deletes a needle. And once again, it's not policy based. It's a script, it's a dump. This for organizations, healthcare, financial services, where you have to have backup policies, this is really a non-starter as well. So these are some of the consequences that I'm seeing, some of the challenges with this. But I want to dive in a little bit more. And I will show everyone the math if you would like to see it, and we can follow up on a conversation. But my engineering team and I, we went in and we did a little bit of analysis. And we took Dan at a fairly large instance, a couple thousand users, and what it would actually take to effectively build a backups via script that met the needs of the company that exported the data or regularly moved that data to Amazon S3. From a starting perspective, it would be at least 250 man hours a year just to get started. 250 man hours a year. This is not accounting for mistakes. This is not accounting for anything else. It is just time making sure that you can do the basic activity of moving data from your instance to an S3 bucket somewhere else. And that is already a challenge. But the most expensive component here is time consuming bulk recovery. When you're talking about, especially if you're an organization, we run into customers with millions and millions of objects. Having to restore an entire instance to a sandbox and then parse and find the exact thing that was deleted, assuming you know what was deleted exactly by name, is going to be a very expensive process. And of course, it only works for a specific application. But Dan, one of the questions I had for you was a lot of the times this makes total sense to an administrator, even the director, even the head of productivity within IT. But sometimes it's very hard to make a business case to explain this to an executive in order to get budget to be able to say, look, I need help. I need to automate this. What's your perspective, Ben? How do you approach this? How do you try to help build a business case or explain to people just how critical the information inside Jira is?
So when you're dealing with, I think that this is true for a vast number that I think the stereotype would work, which is the higher up you go, the less emotion can be involved in the conversation. So you have to be able to say, um, the usual example is let's go for one full working day and let me break it down also by hour. And you're in both of those examples, you would have to say, what's the average cost of like a user? So, if the system went down and therefore the average cost of a person is, um, £100 for that period of time, then then it scales up. If you got 1,000, then you're already, approaching £10,000 for just an hour. If you got 10,000 users, you can see how quickly that escalates. Um, and then you start saying, okay, well, we can do something and it's going to cost us this to maintain it, or we go and buy something and it does it for us and it's going to cost us this. And when you start dealing with very factual information, it becomes a lot easier to have that conversation. When you go in and say, I'm tired of doing this, I don't want to do this anymore, that's not the approach that's going to win you the case.
That is very, very, very good feedback, both on avoiding becoming emotional, because this can be a very, very painful thing. It's very easy to become emotional, especially when some folks don't understand how painful it is.
Yeah,
One of the things I recommend too, Dan, is not to get too in the weeds of the technology either.
don't need to. You just need to state, we can build it and it would work roughly like we'll take it on this date, it does this and it stores it there. Or you pay an app and it does that all for us. And that's all they need to know. They just need to know high level an approach and what's it going to cost the business, and also what is it going to cost the business if it don't do it. That's the more easier that's the easiest route to get some money, because if you say that if we do nothing and you spend zero, the cost of doing that is going to be 100 grand for a day. They're not going to want to pay 100 grand. And honestly, for
Exactly.
most software development companies, it's not 100 grand. You're talking millions. So
100%. And there's also the qualitative angles too, right? There's the what would this do to our customer experience if we couldn't get this information in 8 hours? What would this
absolutely.
do to employee productivity? One thing I always recommend too is there are multiple stakeholders that will care about this in your organization. There's the CIO, but there's also the CISO. And if you're in a highly regulated organization, a CISO becoming aware of this, of the shared responsibility, and where that data is located and where it's stored or where it's not stored, that is also a massive opportunity to be able to get support. Because if you're able to get support to protect Jira, you're going to get support for your entire DevOps workflow and ITSM as well. Now, something I put together too here, Dan, and I'm going to share a lot more of this. If you have any questions, I can follow up with you via email. I kind of try to use, here's an example without having a number, right, for the FTE. But we talk about every single data loss scenario. If you're doing a manual or a script-based backup and export, will require hours of time to get it back. Let's say, and I use a very dumb example here, but let's say an epic is affected from a deletion. Well, usually the person who's done this, made the mistake, maybe has to go and talk to another administrator who's the person responsible for the backup. Well, what do? They have to go evaluate. They have to go then restore that sandbox into a sandbox environment. Depending on the size of the instance, that could take a very long time. And then they have to spend time, communicate with the person who deleted it, and actually find and recreate exactly what was deleted. That alone is already requiring several hours of the day between the person who made the mistake and the person who's trying to help. But it's not those people who are just affected. What if we're very close to a sprint? And what about all the other folks in the organization who are assigned to this and are trying to work? They could potentially, depending on the size of the deletion, could also be stalled as well. And the administrator, who maybe has a focus on technical debt, on removing, on cleaning up the environment, is now focused on this. This is the type of chaos that one single deletion event can hold. And if you're able to understand how to put a business case together in your organization, no executive will say no to be able to provide you the ability to get funding for data protection that's automated for your organization. So one of the things before we get into the final topic that I want to get into with Dan, I do want to provide a little context into how HYCU is able to do this. And I'll show you our philosophy and our approach in a couple of minutes. And then we're going to get back into probably my favorite part of the conversation that we're going to get into. When you think about HYCU, one of our core philosophies here is Jira and Jira Service Management are critical parts of your DevOps and your ITSM toolchain. But your toolchain has way more applications that belong to it, and that's not even counting production. If you were to find a backup service or backup process for each one, you would end up with a very complex web of data structure. You don't know which vendor has which backups, where's the data being processed. You have no control, you have no visibility. You've created silos for yourself. One, HYCU has the broadest coverage of Jira applications or Atlassian applications from software, which now also includes work management, Confluence, Bitbucket, you name it, but also everything around that's interoperable, from security services to other Git repositories, and also production applications. Once again, this helps because it unifies backups across your organization. And especially if you're migrating from data center, you had an IT person who was performing snapshots of those VMs, and they were responsible for those backups. Well, with HYCU, even when you're in the cloud, that person can still manage all backup infrastructure for you so that you can focus on building, on engineering within your organization. Now, the most important piece of all of this is the most damaging component to every organization is not being able to recover granular data. It's having to perform a bulk recovery, as Dan mentioned. What I pride myself in what HYCU can do across every service that is protected is give you the ability to restore the needle in the haystack versus the entire haystack. This is very, very critical. So in an engagement that could take 8 hours to get data back, if you're restoring a simple attachment, we're talking about a minute and everyone gets back to work. And that is a very big differentiator, not just from a money perspective, but also just the pain that you save from not spending your entire day on just trying to keep the lights on. So to me, this is one of the biggest areas that are affected because a backup is a backup. And you can say you have a backup and you can check the box, but if you can't recover from it effectively, then you have nothing. Um, and then from a policy perspective too, you want to avoid scheduling, managing, tweaking your scripts all the time. So one of the things that HYCU does, it allows you to kind of customize your own policy. And you can do it on a per project level because, and Dan could probably talk to this as well. Not every project is the same. Not every project is the same. Some are going to require much more attention and potentially a much higher backup frequency. So you can say this project for this very, very critical initiative, we probably want to have a backup every 6 hours. It's highly volatile. A lot of people are touching it. This other project, perhaps not, and we can do a daily backup or every 2 days. You get to choose that on a per project level, and then you get to choose how long to keep that data. As Dan mentioned, you can store data for 10 years, 15 years. It doesn't matter. You choose how long you want to store that data based on your needs, even if, for example, if you have litigation holds. But the most important component from the policy perspective is you can just assign that policy and it will work forever until you disable it. That means that you are getting notifications, logging, reporting, everything they're saying your backups are ready, your backups are good. You can enable a webhook and get a Slack message every time that your backup activity starts up so that you always have evidence and that you can always provide that to executives as well, whether it's an IT audit or there's a business continuity exercise. But my favorite here is, philosophically speaking, too, we pride ourselves on giving you control of your data at all times. One of the things where we see things go full cycle is the concept of the 3-2-1 rule. Then, uh, back in the day when you first get into IT, that's what you learn from a backup perspective with data center applications, right? It's 3 copies of data on 2 media types and 1 offsite. We got so excited with the cloud, we all adopted it. It was amazing. It brings incredible value. Sometimes we forget the fundamentals. But having an offsite copy outside of the system that you're protecting is fundamentally critical. So one of the things at HYCU where we pride ourselves is we don't store your backups. We could if you want to, but are we really advise you to keep control of those backups that only you can store, that only you can access, and that you can recover from. Think of us mostly as a highway from the Atlassian instance to your storage location of choice. All the data is encrypted in flight and at rest. We don't store it. You control the residency of it. For example, in the UK, certain organizations, data cannot leave the UK. It cannot be stored outside the UK. It cannot be processed outside of the UK. With HYCU, you choose where it runs and you choose the storage location because it's your storage. And you can also choose the networking, the storage class, and even enable immutability for this. Now, it's not just AWS. It depends on what you're using. It's your choice. You have freedom of infrastructure, whether it's Amazon S3, whether it's Azure Blob, Google Cloud Storage, or even things like Wasabi if you want to optimize for cost as well. Now, I wanted to mention that because I wanted to provide more context here around the difference between how much time, money, resources, and customer experience your organization can save by automating backup and giving yourself granular recovery. But the last thing I wanted to talk about here was something that kind of gets left behind sometimes, where we think, okay, I want to be able to restore my issues, my assets, my configurations. There's another very critical element within Jira and Jira Service Management, and that's the role of automations. Now, Dan, from your perspective, this is something that you've played with as well in your career. What's been your experience, your approach with Jira automations?
uh, yeah, I mean, I'm a massive fan of automating in general. I think, um, first of all, not everything should or can be automated. That's okay to admit. But when you are doing a task regularly and more than once, so as soon as you say, right, I got to do this task twice a month, twice a week, whatever that kind of cadence is, um, and it's fairly easy to replicate within an automation rule, then you're immediately saving time, saving energy, saving product, and we can give back some of that, because no one also likes doing BAU work. That's one of the biggest complaints that we always get from every single member of staff is, I don't want to do this. Can the automation rules just handle it and get on with it? Um, so I'm a big advocate for it. I've spent a lot of time working with teams. That's where I get a lot of passion, is about trying to understand the fundamentals of how each team wants to work and needs to work to achieve their goal, and about then trying to like find those little productivity gains. And they often come from automation. So if you're working with software development teams, it could be that every time a pull request is made and needs to be approved, it when it comes into Jira, it goes back out to Slack and the approval is done in Slack. It could be that when an incident is made, it automatically spins a Slack channel and makes a Zoom thing. Like there's so many different aspects that we can immediately kick off from an automation rule, and we don't rely on, again, human error to come into play, because as soon as an action, the parameters have been met, the rule is going to go ahead and go and do that for us, which is brilliant.
No,
Um,
that. Oh, sorry.
no,
Yeah,
go on, go on.
that's one of the things that I was going to mention there, Dan. Too, was you brought up the point with human error. It's not just about saving me from the remedial task as an admin, right?
No.
But it's also saving the organization from my mistakes. Meaning, when you look at any piece of software, whether it's on the GitHub side, whether it's on your CI/CD, even YAML files, people don't always do the best job of effectively managing that. Even Salesforce, right? There's always that thing of, folks don't update their Salesforce. It happens all the time. Automations is a way to completely foolproof your organization from bad
It can certainly
interoperability,
help.
bad
Yeah,
hygiene.
absolutely. If as long as we continuously, as long as we maintain those automations for a start, as long as the data that we provide the automation is relevant and it's not stale, so it's actually active data, then the automation rule has a much higher chance of success. The moment you start to drop those things is when automation will always fail, because if you don't give it good information, you can't expect it to give you good information back. That's just not how it works. It's not a mind reader. It is, what are the parameters I need to run, and I will go ahead and do that for you. Obviously, we're walking more into the world of AI and intelligence for Atlassian, and things like Rovo with the new application announced at Team 24 this year. There will be certain levels of aspects when we can now actually offload entire tasks and just tell an agent bot to go ahead and do that. We obviously aren't there yet. And in terms of automation for Jira, we'll keep it non-app specific, and we'll just go with the native automation rules. We've done everything, like I said, from software development, sending Slack channel messages, to actually running and creating our own self-serve portal entirely on JSM. And we've now reduced the number of tickets into agents by 60%, because it's all handled by the agent. It's all handled by the self-serve. You want to be added to a group? Great. You want to get product access? Cool. Fill in this form. And it's all things now. And then you go into Jira. If you want your project created or archived, if you need new conference space, if you want temporary admin requests, all of these things are now handled by the automation rules using APIs and everything else. We don't touch it apart from approvals. That's the level that we play at.
That I played around with it myself, Dan, the Atlassian intelligence side, and I was already pretty impressed with some of the sample automations that it could provide. Based on my very dumb natural language that I was using, it could still put the pieces together around, closing tickets or opening them up, where there's a comment. These things where it's based on the templates provided, but it's still impressive to see it done via natural language. That's only going to advance. But I also see automations a little bit the same way I see product development, which is sometimes people over automate as well. Um,
Absolutely.
or
Absolutely.
or or organizations, folks come in, new processes come in, and there's a layer of automations that come in,
I
and then
th-
it happens again.
yes, absolutely. First of all, just like anything, it is part of your ecosystem. You have to health check it. You have to maintain that thing. You also have to make sure that you're not seeing duplicate rules. And if you are, you could do some of the consolidation. We saw from the announcements late last year into this year around the automation limit runs, and that's how it's been affected. It obviously there were some talks at Team 24 that I was part of with Rodney Neeson, the Jira guy, and we spoke exactly on that topic about it. Not just because you have an opportunity, you still have to ask the most important question, which is what's the why? The five whys. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do it? And if you ask it five times, you eventually find the underlying cause. And at that moment, you can make one of two decisions, which is great. That is a really good use case for an automation rule. And it works because it's not going to cost as much to create or maintain, and you're going to get benefit from it. Or you can go, great, we can still achieve what you need. We don't have to do it. We just have to make a process change somewhere else. And actually, we are now catching and stopping over automations being created when they're not required to. And we can always make sure that best practice is being followed. So the most important thing whenever you're coming to create a new automation rule is why do you want to do it?
100%, and that applies like that angle on product development. Do you want this feature? Do you have a problem that you're trying to solve, and this is the feature that you think will
Absolutely.
solve that problem? I think, Dan, we can have an entire hour conversation on best practices with automations. But one of the
Absolutely.
things that I noticed too, though, is even with very disciplined organizations and admins who really understand exactly when to actually make these automation rules, you're still dealing with thousands of them sometimes in these massive organizations,
Yeah.
right? And these are a lot of dependencies, a lot of conditions, a lot of different triggers, a lot of different actors, and things can get very complex. And as we know, they could be deleted. From your perspective, Dan, what are some of the consequences at a high level that you can think of that happen if I delete one single automation or maybe several by accident?
So we have run into issues where uh, less experienced individuals who've maybe had temporary admin access at the time have ended up deleting automation rules for other teams. And for the first hour, maybe day, they don't really recognize it. They think, oh, that was weird. I didn't see that notification, or that ticket didn't move, or whatever the use case might be. And then all of a sudden, things start piling up. You've got misinformation out, and then you're starting to make choices, data-driven choices on wrong data, and that plays a massive issue. So it's very important to make sure that there's a process around deletion and things like that. And again, because of the way the native automation systems work, is that there's no backup for it. If you want to do it, you manually have to back up the rules. Now you can mass backup by just exporting every rule, or you have to go into each individual rule and take them out. Now, because of that incident, which was, in fairness, that was a previous company, but what we actually do now is anytime we are input, unless they are templated rules, anytime we are implementing a very, very business critical rule, immediately is taking it. The first thing that we do is take it back up. So once it's ready, is production ready, turn it on, take an export. That just then gets kept on a shared drive somewhere, and we'll change the name so we know which rule it is. We don't want to run into that. And obviously then anytime you do major version changes, then you'll update the export. But it's almost silly the fact that we rely on it so heavily and yet don't do anything in order to ensure its longevity.
Well, it's there, out of sight, out of mind. It just works, right? That's the beauty of products that are amazing. But when it's cloud, you have to think about these things. But Dan, one of the things I noticed too, there's different types of consequences. There's the ones that creep up on you when certain automations are deleted. And that's when we've talked about how potentially you have admins, then leaders, then executives making decisions based on the wrong data, right? And maybe adding the wrong projections. But then you also can even see an impact on resolution times, right? If the automation, somebody has to go and rebuild it, and maybe things aren't happening, tickets aren't getting addressed. So there's so many different webs, and the more custom automations you're using, the more custom problems that you can cause. The simple way to address this is what Dan's mentioned, which is actually creating a backup of that. And we've talked about this exactly. This is a hard delete once you delete an automation. So at HYCU, we've already been providing one-click restore from project level to the attachment of schema, of assets, of configurations, of all of these things that are critical. But we wanted to make sure that we also did the same thing for automations because they are so important. But the one thing that we wanted to do here was not simply, well, let's create a dump of these automations. Let's send Dan a JSON file that he can go and recreate it because he's better off just creating a one-time backup and posting it as a shared drive. But what we really wanted to do was integrate the automation backup and the automation restore into the HYCU experience, which is an automated one, which is a one that you can restore directly to production in one click. And that's what everyone on this call is getting a sneak peek. This is actually live in the product. We just haven't told anybody. We wanted to see who saw it, but you'll be seeing many announcements, many coverage. You're seeing this from a Jira Service Management angle on a backup policy that I've assigned on a project within Jira Service Management. What you're able to do is actually restore a full automation or restore a specific automation. You simply search for the automation that was deleted and you can restore that back to production. And it's not just the name and some of the logic, but it's the conditions, the triggers, the actions, the support connections. All of that gets restored directly to production, and you simply press enable on that automation as if nothing happened. And of course, it's full automation rule set or specific. And what I love about this as well is we're also making sure that that automation is stored in your control with the same rigor that you're storing the rest of your critical backups within Atlassian. This is something I'm very, very excited about. This is something that everyone can leverage. We have a free trial for it because the more automations your organization has, the likelier you are to delete them and to have the ability to restore them. HYCU, we really wanted to include this in our product. And I'm very happy that we're doing it in a way that's fully automated. And I know that's a cheesy pun, but the restore of automations should be automated and should not be a JSON dump that you have to then go and recreate. So with that, Dan, I really wanted to thank you so much for your time. I think your insights are far better and far more valuable than mine as a vendor, you actually being on the partner side, being on the customer side, in the weeds, dealing with this as well. And I wanted to thank you so much for your time on this.
No, I'm very grateful for the invitation to join you today. Obviously, it was a great chat, and it's obviously great to see the new features all in HYCU and in terms of what you guys are doing.
No, thank you so much, Dan. And for those in the audience, scan the QR code. You can access a free trial and test it for yourself. This is already live on Service Management. It will be live very soon on the Jira side. But I want to thank you all for your time. Dan, I'm actually now going to walk down to here in Rotterdam and going to go to the rooftop bash. And we're going to hold a panel, similar discussion here with the folks here in Rotterdam around more so enterprise readiness with Atlassian Guard and what does that mean, Dan? So I've got a lot more Atlassian to discuss today, but I wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank the audience, everyone. This will be recorded. Don't worry. We'll send you an email, and I hope you have a great day. Take care all.